Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WellMed Charitable Foundation Caregiver Teleconnection series. Our series this month is a very important one. It's on emotions. And as a caregiver, I don't have to explain to you how important it is. And today's on anger. So we have two experts. We're so lucky, experts that we love to have with us here. I am going to tell you a little bit about them. Lucy Barylak received her master's degree, in social work from McGill University and has dedicated her career to supporting caregivers. Lucy was the founder and long-term care manager of the Caregiver Support Center at a respite program for family caregivers in Montreal. In 2003 and 2012, she received the Queen's Jubilee Award presented by the Canadian Home Care Association for her dedication in developing a national coalition to support caregivers. She's been a key architect of screening and assessment tools of family caregivers and provided training to professionals across North America. Lucy would also like you to know on a personal note that she was a caregiver for her mother for almost 10 years. Now, Dr. Elliot Montgomery Sklar is a public health professional focused upon supporting the health of the public through the academic work, research, and service. He has led healthy aging programs for seniors and for caregivers in Canada, Florida, and virtually. Dr. Sklar is an associate professor of healthcare sciences at Nova Southeastern University in Florida. He publishes and presents his work internationally, which is focused on the complexity of issues related to aging and caregiving. And I just want to say, as an introduction, we're so lucky to have, experts like this who are talking to us about such a sensitive subject. Lucy, Elliot, take it away.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Many of us feel frustrated, overwhelmed, and angry at times along the caregiving journey, and I'm not an exception to that as well. Many times I felt angry too. Interpersonal conflict can also surface when it comes to sharing responsibilities and making difficult decisions. So this session will address healthy ways to deal with anger and with conflict. So let me tell you a little bit about anger. Anger is part of everyone's emotional compass, helping us navigate life. Anger signals that we are being threatened, injured, possibly deprived, robbed of rewards and hope. We must stand up and take care of ourselves and those we love. The experience of caregiving puts us all to the test. We feel ourselves immersed in the pool of emotions such as fear, sadness, and yes, anger. Anger should be one of our adapted tools to deal with the most difficult circumstances. Sometimes it becomes an obstacle to our struggles, especially when it progresses into aggressive and even violence. For example, yelling at the person we're caring for, possibly shaking them. So we have to really be careful about that emotion and be able to handle it. But far more often, it energizes and motivates us to fix what is broken, believe it or not. So to all the emotions, there's always something positive to that side.
Absolutely. And anger is an emotion that almost all caregivers can identify with at times. I think all people really. How can you not feel angry if someone in your life, if their health is declining and you're witness to that? How can you not feel angry when your own life might become upended because of caregiving responsibilities? How can you not feel angry when all of the caregiving responsibilities might fall on your shoulders? These are things we hear all the time, but there is an important distinction that we need to make, I think, between anger and resentment. Feelings of anger and resentment can often occur together, and though they're similar, they're actually two distinct and different things. So, anger, as defined by the Oxford Dictionary, is a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. Often it's a split-second reaction that occurs due to an irritating or frustrating event or situation. Now, resentment, on the other hand, is much more complex in that it occurs over time and it incorporates several emotions like sadness, anger, and fear. So instead of being a reaction to a single event or situation, it's a culmination of painful or upsetting or disappointing feelings from the past that make it difficult to remain in the present. As a caregiver, it's really easy to fluctuate between these two emotions. For example, you might feel angry if a loved one stubs your toe with a cane or a walker, but at the same time, you might feel resentful because they require your help to be mobile on an ongoing basis. So, why are anger and resentment so difficult to talk about? That's why we're here today. Everyone struggles to express their feelings, but it can be even more challenging as a caregiver. And the process requires a lot of honesty, vulnerability, and willingness to expose your greatest worries and fears. So, anger and resentment are common emotions, but when they infiltrate personal relationships, it can feel like your whole world is crumbling. And I think this is especially true for caregivers who use a lot of social media. For example, while it might seem like the world around you is doing just fine, and you're at home being a full time caregiver, maybe struggling, and it would be normal to even feel more resentful. We're seeing this a lot with younger caregivers who have been raised with technology. Resentment is a commonly reported emotion among millennial caregivers, actually. If you look at Facebook, for example, most people don't share their struggles, they share all the good things. So it makes it seem like good people don't have bad problems. We really need to remember that negative emotions are a part of our human experience and that our emotions don't define who we are. They're an experience, they're not our whole being. So instead of ignoring these emotions, acknowledging them and trying to determine their underlying cause is really important. And maybe even most important to remember that there's nothing wrong with feeling anger. Emotions change all the time. And again, they don't define who we are.
You're so right, Elliot, because to prevent negative emotions from affecting your caregiving responsibilities, it's really important to determine their source. Where are they coming from? Here's a simple at-home exercise to help you get started. And I have to tell you that I use this little exercise in my caregiving journey, and it is helpful. So set a time, 15 minutes, and sit down with a notebook and pen or your computer. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and really explore the emotions you're experiencing. Do you feel overworked and exhausted, unappreciated? Are you angry that you've lost time or your independence? There are no right or wrong answers. Jot down anything that crosses your mind, no matter how silly or insignificant it seems. Once the time is up, review everything you've written. Getting to the bottom of why you feel angry or resentful can help you not only cope with those feelings in the present, but also begin to make changes moving forward. You might even think about, like, you're angry about something, and then when you really write it down and look at it, you might say to yourself, really, does that really matter? I know that people are wondering how they can minimize feelings of anger or resentment, but there is no quick fixes for difficult caregiving emotions. There are tips we'll share later for dealing with conflict, which is different from the emotions we're discussing now. The job of caregiving is filled with highs and lows and changes. um, it's really very hard to kind of handle those emotions. Even so, there are several things that you can do to make things easier. We'll separate them into two categories. So I'm going to talk about self-compassion and behavioral changes. So let's look at, what does it mean, self-compassion? It's the practice of extending love and forgiveness to yourself when you feel inadequate and are suffering. So all these emotions may make you feel, many times even anger could make you feel guilty, but you need to forgive yourself. Specifically, it encourages mindfulness, stay in the present moment versus over-identifying with negative feelings, and common humanity, or reaching out to others who can support you versus self-isolation. So really, you don't need to do this alone. Start small with one of these aspects of self-compassion. Even if it feels like there's no time, take out 5 minutes to take care of yourself. There's also many therapists who specialize in helping caregivers. You really need time to process your emotions, and all of the many emotions that come with caregiving can be an extremely helpful part of self-care. Now, I want to talk a little bit of compassion, okay? Doesn't end with oneself. It's important to be compassionate to those who are sick and to remind yourself that their actions, the people you're caring for, and their behaviors, they are challenged. It's not about them. It's so important to recognize that it's the disease that possibly is making them behave in that way. That can help a lot in easing the anger and frustration we can feel at the time. Remember, many, many times, the things that they're displaying, the behaviors, it's because of the disease that they are going through. Now, another way to view anger is to see your anger as information, okay? What is your anger trying to communicate to you? That's part of sitting down and writing things down. For instance, anger is a signal that our personal boundaries have been violated in some way. Maybe your anger tells you that someone has disrespected you and has spoken to you in a demeaning way. Your anger can then inspire you to talk to that person in a clear, kind manner and maintain your boundaries. Anger can be very productive, believe it or not. To access productive anger, ask yourself these clarifying questions. Am I thinking facts based on my senses, or am I automatically believing bias, disregard, blaming, and judgment thoughts? Okay. What would be the skillful thing I could do next that would move things forward in a meaningful way? What does this situation call for when I look at things clearly? So I know that it's hard to express ourselves respectfully when we're angry. So here are some tips to turn your anger into effective communication. And I really like this slide a lot because look at the word dear, all right? So dear is D for describe, E express, A assert, and R reinforce. So what do I mean by that? So describe the fact you noticed, okay? I've noticed that we each have something of value to say. However, every time I begin sharing something with you, I get talked over, all right? So this is another way of telling the person that they're making you feel bad, but in a different way. So E is for express your feelings or opinions. So you can say, being talked over makes me angry because I'm less involved in the process and cannot meaningfully contribute. Or it makes me upset because I feel excluded and that's difficult for me. Now, A is for assert what you need. It's important to tell people what it is that you need. So you could say, I'd love to be able to share my thoughts without being interrupted or talked over. And R is to reinforce how your request will benefit the other person. That's the whole idea of communication. So you could say, it would make me feel close to you and valued by you if you heard me out, because I know that you value what I'm trying to say. So again, I think that this kind of slide, really, the deer, really puts it a little bit into a better perspective.
It absolutely does, I think, because also anger is a very complicated emotion and it's regularly misconstrued. Yet we can use anger as a helpful messenger, sort of a spark to take some action or a tool to improve our relationships and our lives. I think the key is harnessing and channeling our anger in a positive way. So I thought before we continue, because you provided a lot of good information, let's stop and see if anyone has any questions, any comments, or any other tips that they want to share.
Here's your chance to talk to the experts, folks. If you're on the phone, press *6. I have a little website that can show me that you've done that, and I'll call on you by your prefix if you're on the phone. And if you're on Zoom, you know what to do. Put your hand up, go to the chat room, unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from you. Well, I've certainly enjoyed it to this point because I know anger is one of those things where it comes up and you can't help having it up there.
And I
And
also think it's one of the emotions that caregivers feel most shameful to discuss or admit to. And that's why we want to have this be a safe space where people can share openly. We did get a chat. What if it's the care receiver who is the one who gets angry and lashes out verbally? How to best deal with that? So that's a great question. It's one that we get a lot, and one of Lucy's areas of expertise is dealing with difficult behaviors.
Well, the first thing is very much what I said before. Their behavior is probably due to the fact that the illness is affecting them in one way or another. We have a whole session on that. The only way to really deal with that kind of behavior is not to get sucked into it. What do I mean by that? The first instinct is maybe to get angry, like, why are they talking to me like that? Or it's difficult. What you want to do is really to distract them. That's really important. What you want to do is to get them away from that feeling. And one of the best ways is to just to get their attention, call out their name, look into their eyes. And very basically, you could say, I'd love to have a cup of coffee or tea. Would you like to come with me? Distract them somewhere else, and then really try to do another activity with them at the time. I know it's a quick fix, but that's one way to really handle it. Now, if their behavior really escalates and becomes very, very difficult to manage, you really need to have them take them to the doctor just to see something might have changed. They might have a medical problem, urinary tract infection that you don't even know about. They don't know how to say it, so they're acting out. Or a new medication was prescribed and it's really has a side effect. Or for whatever reason, their disease has progressed.
And that's actually a great segue to our next area of our presentation, which looks at some of those health issues that you were speaking about. Before I continue, I did want to ask if anyone else had any other questions or tips, for example, on how you may be handling difficult behavior. We have another chat. My anger at my mom is tied to my frustration that she's asked multiple times or forgets in a minute that I'm heating a meal for her. Any tips to calm myself? Lucy, you're on mute.
Oh, great question. Sorry about that. One of them is just to take a big breath, and we're going to talk about that. Yes, it must be frustrating to have the same thing repeated over and over again. But if you could just go back to what I said a few minutes ago, if you could just see it, that she's not really doing it out of her own free will. It's the disease process that is causing this. And again, instead of sort of reacting to it, maybe just letting it go. Distractor, as I said before, distracting is really good. And try to really mellow, take breaths. If you have a chance to just go to the bathroom, scream if you want to, let it out. But really, otherwise, it's just one of the things that we as caregivers, especially dealing with these kind of diseases, have to handle.
We did get another chat, and I want to thank everyone so much for your candor and sharing with us.
Yeah.
My anger is directed at the personnel that neglected, abused, or ignored my wife. With no agency willing to take on these highly profitable businesses, I will be energized by my anger to have them revealed, confronted, and punished for treating my loved one with such contempt and indifference. So I had hoped that this session would be related to how to overcome an industry of despair for both the patient and their caregivers. For me, my anger is well-deserved and not something I want to moderate. And I think that's where it goes back to channeling your anger in a positive way. anger is usually what prompts a lot of activists to want to become activists and change policy and practice. Um, I wish that we had the scope and the bandwidth in a teleconnection session to address the anger that you're feeling toward the care industry as a whole, really the healthcare industry. Um, that's such a big issue. And I think one of the things that we try to convey to people is that we need to try to control what we can control. In fact, next week, the emotion that we'll be discussing is uncertainty. And really, one of the best things that we'll have to share is about how to look at things with a lens so that you can recognize what you can have some certainty over. The same is true for anger. I think that, my hope for you, and I thank you again in sharing this, is that you're able to channel that in a positive way, and that the anger doesn't become something that changes who you are in a negative way. So I do want to share, because one of the questions we received and one of the comments that Lucy shared was really looking at some of the health issues that can result in anger. And we know that to be true, for example, for forms of dementia like Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia, actually specifically. As these diseases progress, people do tend to lash out, and usually it's in frustration. Now, that can be especially hard on a caregiver, as we've heard, to deal with sudden bouts of fury. And anger is a common symptom. So, as caregivers, we really need to take a step back and look at the immediate cause. It could be physical discomfort or trouble communicating, frustration on that person's part for maybe not remembering themselves. So, we talked during our program last week about some caregivers being in denial about the decline of a care recipient. And that can make those outbursts of anger even more difficult, because it's really much more difficult to separate the symptoms of the illness with the person and that behavior. It's important also that we're mindful of other health issues and behavioral health issues that can cause anger and frustration among care recipients and also caregivers. So many anxiety drugs, sleeping pills, even antidepressants can also cause anger. And this is one of the common side effects for many of these medications. Fits or anger are rare, but a harmful side effect, especially for those who may already have a predisposition to being angry or aggressive. Now, people who experience chronic pain often feel a lot of anger. It's hard to be in a good mood when you're always in pain. And this can certainly be true for a caregiver and for a care recipient. Now, it might even be harder for the care recipient to be able to express the pain that they're feeling. And that may in turn into anger. So many of us have chronic injuries or arthritis or general aches and pains that come with getting older. And pain can be very hard to manage. It can make us short-tempered. And some pain medications also cause a change in our affect and our mood. Some can lead to aggression. Many people don't realize it, but cholesterol medicines, including statins, which are widely prescribed, there are some studies that show that they're connected to anger and aggression. And some experts say that low cholesterol actually lowers your serotonin, which is our happiness hormone, which could in turn lead to being short-tempered or depressed. And speaking of depression, depression is an interesting one, because irritability often goes along with the feeling of despair. Depressed men, in particular, are more likely to have aggressive outbursts. And it's described as anger turned inward depression. So it can be turned outward too. That is why anger can be associated with depression. And this mood disorder is very well treated, usually with medication and therapy. So, again, there are solves. Uh, Other people don't recognize diabetes. If you're told you have a serious illness like diabetes, you might feel a lot of different emotions. One of them might be anger. But people might not recognize also that our blood sugar, our glucose, links with our stress hormones, our ability to cope, and also our feeling of anger. Many people are on medications now for weight loss, also for diabetes. They're the same GLP-1 medications, and they take away pleasure and comfort that we reap from food. Many people who are on them as a side effect at first wind up feeling more angry because of that lack of comfort. Menopause. Some men might joke about it, but agitation felt with menopause can be real. And it is something, again, linking to hormones and how our bodies function and regulate. Same with thyroid. Um, Thyroid function definitely has an impact on mood, and it can actually increase anxiety and the feeling of anger, also treated with medication. So if you have any of these conditions, if you haven't been to a doctor recently, um, it might be a really good thing to explore because health issues often compound with other issues and stressors. And it's important to get routine checkups. So if you feel like perhaps counseling might also be helpful, a doctor can help to refer you as well.
Thank you, Elliot. These are some great points that many people don't consider. I mean, who thinks if I have diabetes that it's affecting my emotions? We don't tend to think of physical conditions that can contribute to feeling angry or agitated. So I'd like to go on, but maybe I could stop for a minute and just because it's really quite an eye opener for me when we started looking at all this research on the side effects. Has anybody thought about that? Did you ever think that, if you have thyroid or diabetes or anything that can affect your mood? Just a question. I'm just interested.
If anybody would like to respond, please go to the chat room or put your hand up, unmute yourself. If you're on the phone, you can press *6 and I can see that you have opened your line.
Okay, it's something to think about.
For sure.
Yeah, okay. When it comes to resentment, one of the areas that many caregivers struggle is feeling like all the responsibility is on their shoulders. For example, it's rare that all family members will provide equal amounts of care to an ill patient. Now, this one we hear a lot about in families where, that there's often, usually there's one person who shoulders more of that responsibility. That can often result in conflict and resentment. We receive quite a few questions from caregivers, and I'd like to share one of them with you. But I saw that there was something on the chat. Elliot, do you want to deal with that now?
I just, someone had mentioned that they didn't think previously about anger and different health issues being associated.
Well, that's good. We educate ourselves. Okay, so let's look at the letter that we received. I'll read it in case we have someone who's on the phone. My parents are in their late 80s and live on their own. I'm an only child. My father has Alzheimer's, and my mother is in pretty good shape for someone of her age. Though caring for my dad takes a toll on her and she doesn't drive. My father's health declined during the pandemic, and I've worked remotely, making it easier to juggle responsibilities. At first, I had to return to the office part-time, but now I'm being required to go back into the office full-time. This is very stressful, and I'm tired. No, this is very stressful, and I try to use things like Uber to get my parents to medical appointments and having groceries delivered to them since I don't have the same time and flexibility. The problem is that my mother doesn't like having a stranger choose and deliver her groceries, and she doesn't like taking rides from a stranger. I try to explain again and again that I can't be all things to all people, which results in us fighting. I'm angry at the situation I'm in, and I'm frustrated that my mother doesn't understand that I'm only one person. I resent her for being so demanding of me under the circumstances. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to tell you that I totally understand your anger and your frustration. I am glad that you are acknowledging your feelings because we always, Elliot and I say that over and over. It's very important to acknowledge your feelings and not to bury them. they're not going to go away. They're just going to get worse, and they will increase. And they are harmful to you, both physically and mentally as well. So here are a few suggestions that might work. Are you able to speak to your boss or manager about the situation to see if you could have any flexibility in your schedule to work remotely if needed? I know that this can be sensitive, but it sounds like you've been with your employer for at least 5 years. It's hard to imagine that the pandemic has been, it's begun 4 years, 5 years ago. It seems like yesterday. Perhaps you can perhaps they can accommodate you a little bit. If that isn't possible, or maybe you don't want to go back to working remotely, what I think that's really important is you need to be totally honest with your mother and set limits. Make a checklist of responsibilities as the things that you can do for your parents and seeing what is manageable. Communicate with your mother about what you can and cannot do and see if you can find some compromise. Contact a local AAA to see if there's senior ride services in your community so your mom has more potential for a consistent driver if in that she might feel more comfortable with. There may be additional services in the community that can be of benefit. Can your parents afford a home help aide to provide your mom with some respite? Would your parents consider? You could talk to them about considering living community in a senior living community that has transportation, meal services as an option. Sometimes it can be helpful to have a social worker or a caseworker help in navigating tasks and responsibilities among family members. So you might want to go to a little bit of counseling with your mother so she has a clear understanding of what you're going through. Now, for those of you participating today, have you handled any similar issues with members of your family and friends that you would like to share with us?
We have a chat from Larry. Anger seems to emanate from the frustration of knowing there is no solution, excuse me, to the disease. What can I do to get better? And I ask this frequently.
You want to take that, Elliot, or do you want me to?
I think we both probably have things to say. Mine would be, unfortunately, we need to find acceptance. You know, that is the situation. And sometimes I find it very helpful when working with caregivers to use an analogy. I used it before, actually. If someone stubs your toe with a cane or a walker, sure, your toe is going to hurt, but you know that they didn't do it intentionally. What if they can't see and they stub your toe with a white cane, for example? We're not going to be upset with that person. Sometimes that's helpful in just recognizing that this disease, Alzheimer's or dementia, is no different, and accepting it allows us the opportunity to enjoy good moments with that person. And I think that's so key.
I have to say that you're absolutely right. On a personal level, once I accepted the fact that my mother was no longer the person that I knew, I cannot tell you what a load off my shoulders that was and how it changed our relationship. I accepted her for who she was at that time. It doesn't mean that I wasn't sad. It doesn't mean that I wasn't frustrated, but I totally agree with you. We have to accept the fact that this is a disease that we have no control over. The only control that you have over that kind of a disease is to be able to control your emotions and not allow them to get in the way of your own health and your well-being and taking care of the person you're caring for. It's not easy to do, but you can do it one step at a time.
And to circle back, neither of us are saying to not feel angry, but rather to feel it, to tap into it, to express it, to harness it, to use it in a positive way. And that was why I was saying earlier, a lot of caregivers feel a lot of shame for expressing anger that they feel about the situation that they're in. What we find is that caregivers who find themselves unable to express that wind up feeling angry later down the caregiving journey. And that might even be after that person is no longer with us. So the anger surfaces, whether you want to deal with it or not, it will come up. And that is why it's so important to know how to work with it, not against it. I think anger tends to be the most undervalued, actually, and misunderstood of our emotions. It has such an important task that Lucy mentioned earlier. It helps us know when we feel threatened or we're in danger or that we need to protect ourselves, those we love, and what is rightfully ours. Anger is also a prime motivator. When we feel that enough is enough, we usually find ourselves propelled into action. And so the question is, why do some of us experience more anger than others? For those of us who deal better with our anger than others, this is actually something that we likely learned in childhood, and also something that scientists are actually now linking to our genetic makeup, including our emotions and anxiety. So think a bit about how your parents might have dealt with anger when you were growing up. Think about how your culture or your religion or your community regards anger. That's important too. Some cultures are considered to be more fiery or feisty than others. And also think of how conflict has existed in your relationship history. Sometimes stressors can make existing conflict worse. So, whether you are able to right now or at a later point, think about these things because how we viewed anger growing up is really a barometer of how we use anger in our adult lives. And as people, we're not very good at giving ourselves credit for getting through tough times. Many of us instead get angry with ourselves. Oh, we got this a lot during the pandemic that we could have done better, we should have done better. We also need to remember a lot of what we know about coping with our emotions, including anger, comes from what we saw growing up and our culture. We learn and we learn to cope by example. So it's an important lesson for us to think about in terms of our emotions and what we might be modeling to others as well. I've always seen caregiving as one of the most honorable duties that a person can fulfill and model to others as a way of fostering a more caring community, for example. So it's important to give yourself some credit and think about that. I did see that we had something in the chat. Vicky said, thank you. The example of the person with the cane and the person with Alzheimer's not intentionally hurting us is helpful for my attitude adjustment. Well, I'm grateful for your comment, Vicky, and I'm glad. Sometimes we need to have a completely different view on something to be able to have better perspective. I think what's also super interesting to Lucy and I when we were preparing our presentation for today was an article that we stumbled upon in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease Reports. And it was a systematic review of literature, which means that it looked at all of the research findings before it, focused on anger and hostility and caregiver health outcomes. And the findings indicated that higher levels of caregiver anger and hostility exerted a negative effect on caregivers' physical health. So, higher anger control, meaning holding your anger in, was also associated with weight gain. And it makes me think of that old saying, it's not what you're eating, it's what's eating you. The study also found that higher expressed anger predicted higher glucose dysregulation. So, blood sugar, what we were talking about earlier, and that link with anger. So, caregivers who contained their anger gained weight, and those who expressed it had irregular blood sugar patterns. It's interesting that both of those, holding the anger in or expressing it, link with insulin levels in our body. So the study was the first of its kind to measure evidence demonstrating harmful effects of anger and hostility on caregiver health. And it highlighted the need for more preventive interventions to support family caregivers who are experiencing levels of anger. And that's why we're here today. And for those who are interested in eating better, Lucy and I also have programs that are recorded on health and wellness on the YouTube Caregiver Teleconnection channel from the WellMed Foundation. So we're going to include that in our resources actually a little later. But I wanted to ask you, Lucy, if you had to leave our participants today with some very specific, tangible pieces of advice to help them in dealing with anger, what would they be?
Well, the first one, think before you speak. Take a pause. In the heat of the moment, it's easy to say something you'll later regret. Take a few moments to collect your thoughts before saying anything and allow others involved in the situation to do the same, okay? Once you're calm, express your anger. You're talking about that, but in a way that you can express yourself. As soon as you're thinking clearly, express your frustration in an assertive but non-confrontational way. State your concern and needs clearly and directly without hurting others or trying to control them. Get some exercise. Believe it or not, it's amazing. Physical activity can help reduce stress that can cause you to become angry. If you feel your anger escalating, go for a brisk walk if you can. And if you're more of an athlete, go for a little run or spend some time doing other enjoyable physical activities. It doesn't have, it could just, it could just be something simple. Go for a walk, get outside. Take a time out. Timeouts aren't just for kids, I want to tell you. Give yourself short breaks during times of the day that tend to be stressful. A few moments of quiet time might help you feel better, prepared to handle what's ahead without getting irritated or angry. Identify possible solutions. I do that a lot. Instead of focusing on what made you mad, work on resolving the issue at hand. All right. For example, this is an example about children, but it's, it could be really, you could sort of understand what it means. So if your child's room is messy, close the door for the time being, Is your partner late for dinner every night? Schedule meals late in the evening or agree to eat on your own a few times a week. Remind yourself that anger won't fix anything and might only make things worse. Stick with the I statements. That's very important to keep in mind. To avoid criticizing or placing blame, which might only increase tension, use I. For example, statements to describe the problem. Be respectful and specific. For example, you could say, I'm upset that you left the table without offering to help with the dishes instead of you never do any housework. Because you're right away putting that person on the defensive. So what's there to say? The anger just increases. Don't hold a grudge. Forgiveness is a powerful tool. If you allow anger and other negative feelings to crowd out positive feelings, you might find yourself swallow it up. You're just swallowed up by your own bitterness and sense of injustice. But if you can forgive someone who angered you, you might both learn from the situation and straighten your relationship. When you're angry, when you don't forgive, what you're doing is actually giving somebody else the power because how it makes you feel. Use humor to release tension, as a lot of people do. Lighten up. You can help diffuse tension. Use humor to help you face what's making you angry and possibly unrealistic expectations you have for how things should go. Avoid sarcasm, though. It can hurt feelings and make things worse. So humor and sarcasm, just be careful of that. Practice relaxation skills when your temper flares up. And physically when I'm angry, I know what's going on in my body. I can feel it. Put relaxation skills to work. Practice deep breathing exercises. Imagine a relaxing scene like you're on the beach, or repeat a calming word or phrase such as, take it easy. You might also listen to music, write in a journal, or do a few yoga poses if you're into yoga, whatever it takes to encourage relaxation. Know when to seek help. Now, that's important. Learning to control anger is a challenge. It's extremely challenging for for anyone at times. Seek help for anger issues if your anger seems out of control, causes you to do things you regret, or hurts those around you, especially the person that you're caring for.
Those are
We've got a couple of chats,
We
if you
did.
want them.
Yeah,
Okay,
I was gonna read them.
good.
One of them actually, Lucy, you touched upon. Enrique asked, "How do you help someone not hold a grudge?" And I think, Lucy, you provided some really good tips there, or good perspective, I should say. But I want to provide another bit of perspective, and I need a volunteer. I need someone who has a bottle of water with them, or a cup of water, or something that they can hold.
Well, is there someone from the audience? If not, I do.
This is my demonstration on that, on how to help you not hold a grudge. Okay. So Lucy, you have a cup or something with you? Okay. How much do you think that cup weighs?
I would say a few ounces.
A few ounces. Okay, great. Keep holding the cup. Okay. And I'm going to read our next chat, and I want you to keep holding onto that cup. Don't let it go. Don't let it slip or fall. Okay. We got another chat. Our sons who live out of state help tremendously by serving as the enforcers of the doctor's directives for no driving or chainsaw use for our person, their father. Their father is less likely to rage against them. That allows me, who lives here with him, to avoid the enforcer role as much as possible and serve as the companion, caregiver, and activity director. As he perseverates on these hot topics, I can calmly state that he needs to talk to our sons. And that's a great, great, great tip. Now I'm going to circle back, Lucy. How much does the cup weigh now?
1.5 pounds.
A pound and a half, right? So that cup is like holding onto a grudge, and you can put it down now. I do this actually with my students in a classroom, and I have them hold their water bottles for a really long time. The longer we hold on to something, light as it may be, the heavier it becomes. The same holds true with a grudge.
I
So
have to say to the audience, I didn't know he was going to do this with me. So that was a good example.
it's an impromptu question, but one that we get asked a lot. I think caregivers feel that, and it relates to anger. So I thought it was a really good example. Thank you. And something else that I wanted us to share as well, I would agree with all of those tips, by the way, Lucy. Some of us don't know how to approach conflict or know what to say. I teach conflict resolution in healthcare at the university at which I'm a professor. And I find it very helpful to share this slide of some conflict resolution phrases because some of us need strategies to have more effective communication. So, for example, if you are sharing caregiving responsibilities and you have some differences among you and that other person, a really good way to begin a conversation if there is conflict is let's set aside our differences and find a solution that helps whomever it is that you're providing care for. Or if someone shares something that is less than pleasant, you can say, I really appreciate your honesty. Why don't we work together toward a solution? So there are a lot of things that might be not a part of our normal lexicon or things that we say every day. And that's why sometimes having something like this can be really helpful, especially for those of you who have loved ones in care facilities where you may have some conflict with professionals working there. These are very politically correct ways to engage in more productive conversations about our anger or our frustration. We also wanted to share a bunch of different resources here for hotlines and helplines. 988, everyone should know that offhand. You can phone or text. It is a mental health crisis hotline that is so wonderful, especially for people who need to vent. Alzheimer's Association provides a support line as well for the same purpose. And you can reach them at 1-800-272-3900. There's also the National Family Caregiver Support Program. and you can call them at 1-800-677-1116. See, we have another, oh, thank you for putting in the chat how to register for next week's program on how to handle uncertainty. We're building upon our themes in our series of emotions. And we have more resources to share. There are a bunch of online support groups, which a lot of caregivers find very helpful, especially when it comes to expressing anger, because other caregivers know what other caregivers go through best. That's why we're here in the teleconnection, learning from one another. So I want to provide the resources as well for reaching out to the WellMed Charitable Foundation, which you can find here, while I pass the baton over to Evelyn to share some information about upcoming programs. And if anyone has any last questions or comments, you can feel free to enter them in the chat as well.
Thank you, guys. Oh, what an interesting conversation this was. And I thank the caregivers who participated so much, because it always, nobody can help a caregiver like another caregiver. And I think we've all been there at this point. I know Lucy and I and Elliot all have. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about getting the resources. If you got this number or the Zoom link from someone else other than, excuse me, other than the caregiver teleconnection, you're going to want to call that number that you see on your screen, 866-390-6491, and get registered. Otherwise, you won't get a copy of the resources. And the other good thing about being registered is that you will get a copy of the monthly calendar. And we've got some really good things on this monthly calendar, which I will tell you a little bit about. Let's see, next Tuesday, we've got caregiver guilt and distorted thinking. The following week, we've got another of this series, which is, of course, on uncertainty. Then the following Monday, the 24th, we have a full Spanish one presented by a medical doctor on the fact that stress is a gift that can help you deal with things. And on the following week, we will have the last part of the series, which is how to process sadness. And I think one of the things that, comes right along with anger often is followed by sadness, sadness with the situation, sadness with the way that you handled things, shame, whatever. Anyway, so it's going to be a really great month for presentations on how to really look at your emotions, how to deal with them in the best way possible. And who better to help us do that than dear Lucy and dear Elliot, or dearest Elliot, or whatever you say for boys. And we do have a lot of thank yous, and the session survey is up. Please fill that out. And I would tell you all that we appreciate so much your helping us make this podcast rich with your comments. And the podcast will be on www.caregiverteleconnection.org or at the YouTube site that Elliot mentioned. And we have a treasure trove there of presentations from over the years now. It's, I don't know, 3-4 years that we've been saving those on podcasts. And it is amazing because every one of them is done by experts in their field on different topics in caregiving. So it is really a library of good information. And we ask you to, refer your friends to it, your family, other caregivers, the people in your institution, if you've got somebody in a assisted living or nursing home. So I want to thank you all for being here and participating. I also want to thank the WellMed Charitable Foundation for their generosity in staging these sessions and in doing such a good job of getting the kinds of speakers that can help people learn to grow and love what they do as a caregiver. So Elliot, Lucy, thank you so much. You did such a great job. And if there's one last question, I think we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, we have a few minutes, so please feel free to ask any question you want.
And
I got a
Lucy,
lot of thank yous here.
and we did. And I want to thank everyone for participating. And Lucy, thank you for that workout. I know holding the cup wasn't easy. And I hope everyone remembers that. It's something that my students always say they take with them forever.
And
That,
I have to tell you, it actually felt much heavier.
of course, I have students that are sweating at the end of the class holding a small water bottle.
That's great. Okay, folks, I don't see anything, so I'm going to go ahead and end the session. It's just almost time. I just want to thank you all so much for being here, and I hope that you will continue to be a part of this series because all of these emotions kind of mesh like this, and one leads to another and then another, so it's really good to do the whole series, and we look forward to your participation. And with that, I am going to leave the meeting and stop
Take
the
care.
recording. Yes, everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Evelyn. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Wish it would stop raining.
Yeah, thank you all both.
Of
Appreciate all.
Thanks, Tina. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.